July 1944, an officer candidate school facility attached to 3rd Army, England. The morning mist clings to the damp parade ground, where a single soldier stands at attention for a midnight equipment inspection that has turned into a 3-hour ritual of humiliation. His gear is already clean, yet the instructor demands it be dismantled once more. 8 candidates started this cycle. Only one remains. When the final candidate submits his tactical exercise report, the instructor marks it with a 0, citing a lack of officer-like demeanor despite the platoon successfully completing every objective. This is not a failure of training. It is a calculated removal. A single notebook hidden in a desk drawer contains the names of every man who was forced out. Before the day is over, that notebook will serve as the final evidence of a broken system and a man who will have to answer for his bigotry. This is the story of what Patton did when an instructor kept a notebook on how to break every black candidate. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the World War II stories that show the moments that forced people to face what they had done. Sergeant Thomas Keating was 27 years old, a son of St. Louis, Missouri, who had deployed to Normandy as part of an infantry unit. Before the war, he had worked in the stockyards, a life of heavy labor that taught him the value of grit and the weight of a man's word. In France, he held his squad together for 3 weeks under intense mortar fire, losing 2 good men in the hedgerows before his commander recognized his composure and recommended him for officer training. He carried a pocket-worn photograph of his younger brother, who was still serving in the Pacific, and it was that memory of family that pushed him to seek a commission so he could lead others home. He arrived at the school in England, expecting a test of leadership and tactical competence, but he found instead a wall of manufactured failure. Captain Morris Underwood was 37, a tactical instructor from Spokane, Washington, who moved through the facility with the cold precision of a man who believed his birthright was to dictate the boundaries of others. He insisted that the officer corps was an exclusive club, one that required a specific pedigree which he claimed Sergeant Keating lacked. Underwood took pride in his tailored uniform and his impeccably polished boots, which he kept mirror-bright while his candidates slept in the mud. He kept a small, leather-bound notebook tucked into the lining of his field desk. In it, he meticulously documented the psychological breaking point of every black candidate he encountered. He treated the training program not as an opportunity to build leaders, but as a filter for his own prejudices, convinced that he was the final guardian of an order he believed was worth defending through any means necessary. By July 1944, the Allied front in Western Europe hung in a delicate balance. The beachheads were secured, but the interior remained a grinding, bloody stalemate of hedgerows and hidden machine gun nests. Supply lines stretched thin, and the strain on leadership was absolute. Every man needed to perform at his peak. There was no room for the internal friction of bias to dictate who held a rifle or who stood at the head of a platoon. The Army was a massive, clanking machine of iron and bone, and it worked best when all its gears moved in unison. Yet, despite the gravity of the mission, some pockets of the service remained trapped in smaller, darker mindsets. In the rear area training facilities, old habits from before the war persisted. Instructors who had spent years guarding rigid, exclusionary boundaries saw the influx of new recruits as a threat to their authority. They viewed the rapid integration of qualified combat veterans into officer roles not as a strategic necessity, but as an affront to their own status. While the main force fought for every yard of French soil, these instructors built invisible walls within their own fences, letting standards slip and malice fester. This culture of quiet obstruction had been allowed to slide for far too long, with senior officers turning a blind eye to the patterns of attrition in the training camps. It took the collapse of a specific, high-stakes tactical exercise for the facade to finally shatter. The machinery of justice began to grind, leading back to the cold morning mist of that OCS facility. Sergeant, your report is marked with a 0. Explain your failure to demonstrate officer-like presence, Captain Underwood said, his voice flat and devoid of any warmth. Captain, My squad completed the objective in 32 minutes. We recovered all equipment and maintained formation throughout the entire exercise. I do not understand the grading, sir, Keating replied, his tone measured but firm. Understanding the grade is not your concern, Sergeant. The concern is your inability to command the respect required for this uniform. You clearly lack the intuitive nature of an officer, Underwood answered, leaning back in his chair, his gaze lingering on his own perfectly pressed sleeves. Sir, I have followed every regulation in the manual. My scores on every written exam are in the top 5% of this cycle, requiring a review of the tactical notes, Keating said, his jaw tightening. Request denied. A man who relies on manuals to teach him how to lead will never be an officer. You don't have the instinct for it. You never will, Underwood stated, a cold smile touching his lips. Is that your professional assessment, sir? Or is it based on the fact that I am the only candidate left in this platoon who does not share your background? Keating asked, his voice dropping an octave. Watch your tone, Sergeant. You are skating on thin ice. It is my job to ensure that only the right sort of men earn a commission. Men like you are better suited for the infantry ranks, not the officer corps. That is how the system maintains its integrity, Underwood replied, tapping a finger on the leather notebook resting on his desk. That system is failing the men in the field, sir. I have led squads in Normandy. I know what an officer looks like, and I know what a coward looks like, Keating said, stepping forward. You have no authority to speak to me that way. Get out of my office, Sergeant. If you show your face here again with these complaints, I will see to it that you are reassigned to a labor battalion in the rear, Underwood warned, his eyes narrowing. Keating left the office, walked straight to the post adjutant, and laid out the pattern of systematic failure Underwood had enforced. The adjutant listened, read the complaints, and understood the gravity of the claim. The report reached Patton within the hour. Patton's jeep pulled to a stop before the OCS administrative block. 4 stars gleamed on his steel helmet, and the ivory handles of his revolvers caught the pale, filtered light of the English morning. He stepped down without a word, his boots striking the gravel with a heavy, rhythmic finality. The cadre in the hallway stiffened, the air in the room suddenly thin and brittle. He did not look at the instructors. He walked directly toward the office of Captain Underwood. Patton stood in the doorway for a long moment, his eyes scanning the space before settling on the man at the desk. He did not offer a greeting. He simply stepped inside, his presence filling the small office until the walls seemed to shrink. You kept a notebook, Captain. What is written in this book? Underwood hesitated, his face flushing. Then he stiffened his back. It is a record of candidate performance. General. It tracks aptitude for leadership. You tracked 8 men. Captain, did they all lack aptitude? They were simply not officer material. General, the standards are rigorous, and they failed to meet them. You marked Sergeant Keating with a 0. Why? He failed to demonstrate the necessary demeanor, General. It is an instinctual requirement for command that he clearly lacks. Patton moved to the desk and placed the notebook in the center of the blotter. He looked at Underwood, his expression a mask of cold, hard stone. You have spent your time here playing a game of exclusion. You decided that your personal preferences were the standard for the United States Army, and you used your position to discard men who had already proven their worth in the mud of Normandy. You believe that your definition of an officer is the only one that holds weight, but you have mistaken your own narrow prejudice for the requirements of service. You have broken men who earned their place here, and you have done it with the cowardice of a man who hides his malice behind a grade book. Sergeant Keating has been in combat. He has led men under fire while you were sitting in this office calculating how to destroy his career. You are not a guardian of this institution. You are a cancer within it. You have 2 choices before you, and you will make them now. You can resign your commission this instant and leave this post, or you can accept the assignment I have prepared for you. You have spent your career deciding who isn't fit to be an officer. Let me show you what isn't fit for an officer. Decide now. Underwood stood trembling, his eyes fixed on the desk. He did not speak, but his silence was an admission. Patton did not wait for a verbal answer. He turned on his heel and walked out, leaving the captain staring at the open notebook. Patton's orders were carried out with silent, immediate precision. 2 military police officers arrived at the administrative building, their faces grim as they escorted Captain Underwood toward the maintenance area of the facility. The air smelled of heavy oil, industrial soap, and the stagnant dampness of unmaintained latrines. Other instructors stood at the edge of the yard, their eyes averted, as Underwood was stripped of his instructor insignia. They watched him pick up a heavy, long-handled brush and a bucket of caustic cleanser. The sound of his boots on the concrete floor echoed through the open bay as he was ordered to begin the task of scrubbing the facility's sanitation troughs by hand. There was no reprieve and no negotiation. The other officer candidates, including Sergeant Keating, stood on the perimeter, watching the man who had once held their careers in his palm, now laboring in the filth he had sought to enforce on others. It was a stark, public undoing. Every stroke of the brush against the tile served as a reminder of the standards Underwood had claimed to protect, now reduced to the basic, necessary maintenance of the men he had deemed beneath his own station. Sergeant Thomas Keating returned to the front lines following his commission. He served with distinction through the remainder of the war, leading his men across the Rhine and into the heart of Germany. He survived the conflict, returned to St. Louis in 1946, and lived a long, quiet life, eventually passing away in 1992. He often told his grandchildren that his career was built on the simple principle that an officer's only true power was the trust he earned from the men who followed him into the fire. Captain Morris Underwood did not return to a command position. Following the incident at the training facility, he served out his remaining time in a rear-echelon logistics unit, handling the most menial sanitation duties assigned to the camp. He was quietly discharged in 1945. He returned to Washington, where he lived in relative obscurity, often expressing a bitter, deep-seated resentment toward the changes he saw in the military structure. He died in 1971, still insisting that his actions had been necessary to preserve a standard that the rest of the world had long since moved past. General George S. Patton never spoke of the incident to the press or in his published memoirs. He kept the report of the investigation in his private desk, buried beneath maps and movement orders. He mentioned the case only once, in a personal letter to his wife, noting simply that he had corrected a misalignment in the ranks, and that the Army was once again focused on the only thing that mattered, which was the defeat of the enemy. Some historians have argued that administrative interference during the pressure of combat training often reflected the broader, unyielding prejudices embedded in the military structure of the era. Others have argued the opposite, suggesting that the exigencies of a total war effort demanded a rigid adherence to established hierarchies to maintain order. What is certain is that the intervention ensured the commission of a combat-proven leader and effectively dismantled a localized systemic practice of exclusion, demonstrating that no officer's authority superseded the necessity of merit in the field. If you had been in Patton's position, would you have done the same, or would you have opted for a softer disciplinary approach? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories about the moments that forced people to face what they had done, make sure to subscribe.